All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome to this evening's session of the Development Control Committee. For the benefit of members of the public watching or participating in the meeting, I would first like to go through some quick housekeeping rules. In the event of a fire alarm, we have no drill scheduled. It is for real. If the fire alarm does sound, please leave the building as quick and as orderly as you possibly can by the nearest available exit. The fire exits are marked. There's one at the back, and we can go out the other side, those of us who are this side of the room. Please go down the stairs and we meet in the War Memorial Park. This is a public meeting. It is webcast live on the internet, so if anyone has a problem with that when they're speaking, please let us know. And a quick courtesy request on mobile phones. I know we live in a connected world, but if you could please either switch them off or turn them to silent for the benefit of everybody, that'd be very much appreciated. I'd like to explain who everyone is on this committee tonight. My name is Councillor Andrew McCormick. I am chairman of this committee. To my right are councillors who will be making decisions on the applications in front of us on this agenda tonight. To my immediate right and left are officers who will be presenting the applications and providing advice to the committee. The Development Control Committee is a regulatory committee and not a political meeting. The councillors serving on it are acting in a quasi-judicial capacity. The committee will be considering the published papers and examining the evidence brought before us tonight, and will make decisions based on planning reasons. We are guided by national and local planning policy and guidance. At the appropriate time, I will invite speakers to contribute to the meeting in the order set out in the update paper. May I ask that all speakers, including visiting members, speak clearly, please, and keep to points made on the application to material reasons only. No further dialogue between the members of the committee and speakers will be permitted once questioning has finished. All speakers will be reminded of their permitted speaking time and will be advised when they have 1 minute remaining. May I ask that all committee members avoid repetition and keep any comments on each planning application to the maximum of 4 minutes. This evening we have 9 applications on the agenda and some post items. We anticipate finishing by 9 o'clock. I understand that planning can be emotive and ask that everyone remains polite and cordial and professional throughout this meeting. Thank you. First item of business, apologies for absence and substitutions. Shall we note Councillor Court?
Yes. Councillor Court had to leave the committee because he's not done the training.
Thank you. Next item, appointment of a vice chair. I shall throw this open for nominations. Do I have any nominations for vice chair?
I'd like to nominate Councillor Robinson.
I'll second that.
No other nominations? The committee content to nominate Councillor Robinson, vice chair? Agreed? Congratulations, Councillor Robinson. You are hereby elected vice chair. Do you require a hand? Okay, item 3, declarations of interest. Do I have any declarations of interest? Councillor Hussey?
The applicant is well known to me.
Thank you. Will you be sitting that one
I
out?
will not be speaking. I won't be taking part in the debate or the vote.
Thank you. And Councillor Durrant?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I declare an interest in application 2203-153, Wise Lane. As I called it in, I think I could be called a predetermined. So
So I take it you'll be leaving the room at that
I'll
point
leave the
then?
room at that point, yeah. You have all my comments that I need to put.
Thank you very much. Or urgent matters, do we have any? I'm not aware of any. Okay. Minutes of the meeting held on 10th May 2023, pages 5 to 82 on your agendas. Yeah, okay. There are no questions on their accuracy. I'm happy to move the minutes from the chair. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Robinson, thank you. All agreed? Excellent, thank you. Right, down to main business. Planning applications. Item 1, land at 162183 Brimpton Road, Balkhurst. Officers would like to introduce.
Thank you, Chair. This is a full application for 2 dwellings with associated parking at Brimpton Road, Balkhurst. I draw members' attention to the update paper, where we have now received a response from the West Berks Council emergency planners, and you will note that they are content with the assessment made by the County Council emergency planners. No further update is reported. And you'll see that there are a number of reasons set out by officers as to why this scheme is considered unacceptable, including a number relating to biodiversity matters. I'd remind members that the decision maker must have regard to legislation that considers protected species. You have a detailed report before you which sets out the planning balance, acknowledging the contribution towards the housing land supply, but clearly that these biodiversity reasons are clear reasons to refuse the application, and the recommendation is therefore for refusal.
Thank you. So I think we had Mr. Scott Malden down as an objector. Do we have any objectors for this item? Take one of the mics down on the top row there. Okay, so when you're ready, thank you.
Good evening, Chair. Let me start by wishing you all the best for your new role. Weeks ago, it was actually only 3 reasons for refusal, but now we have 7. The first is regards to SSC diversity side of things. The biodiversity officer has claimed that the area is not suitable as they believe, and was assessed, and the officers have discounted that site in the report. The officers state that a section 106 can be put in place to secure the dwellings and the trees with regards to potential loss of these trees. This also links back to the biodiversity and to reason 7. Own the site and wish to build these houses are fully aware of these trees be sold. Any prospective purchaser would obviously turning to the second to the next reason, where an inspector raised no one. This was supported in the report, but that the text is therefore his recommendations will largely be within residential gardens and therefore knowledge. The net gains we are providing is claiming that because it cannot be secured, therefore that rainwater would be collected on the site, used for watering of plants, all other sites, and therefore there would be no cause for additional flooding further upstream. Therefore, I'm going to conclude. These dwellings, in my eyes, will not cause any harm to any of the trees. The houses, at this time, when we don't have the 5-year land supply, in my opinion, does outweigh.
Are there any questions?
Can I ask officers, is it the flooding down to the SSSI, the lane?
the critical drainage area, and that's a locally designated within our local plan, and therefore a flood. That information hasn't been submitted, so without in the
Councillor Robinson.
Biodiversity net gain on an application like this.
net gain on all sites. There's been a transition period, and that actually comes into does talk about seeking measurable net gains in any event, although it doesn't set.
So, as I understand that correctly, right now there is no.
Do I have any more questions?
Chair, as I called it to committee, I thank you for reasons for refusal. This has been constraint on development, has changed over that time, and I'll be as blunt. Firstly, this is not in the countryside as far as I am concerned. To give me an exact number, it means that it is in a the viewing of this site are considerable. Most of those houses have 4 or 5 already. The former school, which is now used by Bewley Homes area, and therefore, in my view, the departing from not allowed rights and are really important. We all agree that great crested newts and slow worms, grass snakes are valuable to the ownership of the individuals who are coming forward, and we cannot in perpetuity make sure that grass snakes and everything else are looked after. My view is that the relocation site is acceptable. I believe responds well to the trees. Buffers for trees can't always be a set number. I think we as a committee sometimes think to ourselves, actually that fits in with the landscape it is in, and sometimes a 5-metre buffer is right. Sometimes it should be 25. I mean, we have to be flexible in our delivery of what we see. I'm just pointing these things out to you, hopefully in the way that it can lead the debate. Biodiversity net gain, as we've heard, is in excess of what is required as a guidance from us. In fact, it's twice the limit. And until we get the government to firmly tell us what we should be doing, I think we have to judge things ourselves until we've got legislation that points us in that proper direction. I believe that the 2 tree issues, genuinely, people will see these homes, and sometimes we have to buy it or don't buy it, or live in it and don't live in it, but I do think we should give them the opportunity to do that. So I will listen to the debate and see what my colleagues say. Thank you.
Councillor Bound.
Thank you, Chair. I've listened to what the applicant's agent has said, and he has certainly satisfied me in many ways in terms of what could happen to the reptiles on site. I mean, he stated that the area that is designated for reptiles on site is where the reptiles at present have been found. And I don't think anybody can say that those reptiles are going to stay in one position all the time. I mean, they are creatures, they move around, and they can move around anywhere on the site. And then we have this mitigation put forward, which is also in the ownership of the applicant elsewhere. So from my point of view, the reptile side of things is sorted, if you like. I understand what's being said about the bio net gain, but again, as I understand it, it is an aspiration. The one thing that does slightly concern me is the fact that there hasn't been anything brought forward from the applicant about the upstream drainage. But I've certainly lived in that area for nigh on 50 years. Which is quite a considerable time and a lot of experience of it, and I haven't really known any flooding problems whatsoever in the area. I note that the West Berkshire emergency planners haven't brought forward any recommendation to refuse. The fact that the site is outside a settlement policy boundary, in my mind, doesn't hold very much weight. The whole of Borkhurst Road has been pretty well developed right down to Shaw Lane, and a lot of that was outside the settlement policy boundary, agreed by this committee and officers. So that doesn't really hold weight. So I'm waiting to hear what other people have got to say in terms of the debate before I reach a concrete conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any more speakers? Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. I know this road reasonably well. Both my children went to school directly opposite this site. And as has already been said, it is well developed. It's not in the countryside. It's a very nice area to live in. And I look at it, it's close to the school. Couldn't really be closer to the school. It's close to shops. It's close to a pub. It's pretty well on a bus route. And the reptiles, I think we've covered. And what I see is a very deliverable site that does make a small contribution to our housing land supply, which we need. I've seen a lot worse sites come forward and get approved. One of the reasons for objection is the density. And it's a bit more dense than some of the surrounding properties, but it's not a dense development. So, as I say, I see it as a totally deliverable site. And for that reason, I move for approval. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, Councillor Freeman, you want to say a few words?
Thank you, Chair. I'd certainly be happy to second the motion, providing we can add some conditions surrounding the reptiles on site. That's the only thing I want to see, is to make sure that we have that covered. But I'd be quite happy to second the motion for approval, providing we have conditions around the reptiles. Please.
Councillor Howell-Sorrell, then I'll...
If we're going for approval, I'd like to see a whole spate of informatives around sustainable development and suggestions around how they can build the house to the highest possible standards.
Okay, I'll invite Mike to make some comments from an officer perspective.
Thank you, Chair. So I think it's just to, I suppose, pick up a few points in terms of what's been said. So I understand the point being raised about the fact that it doesn't appear, or the location is considered acceptable, but clearly it is in the countryside in terms of planning policy, so it needs to be considered in that light. In relation to the point about the relocation of reptiles, that has not been resolved yet. So I appreciate that it sounds like there can be a solution, but that has not been resolved yet, and there is not the detail before you this evening to resolve that. So I think that could be a point possibly for deferral, or possibly delegated to officers to resolve through Section 106. I think we'd have to take that into account. In relation to the tree issue, I think there needs to be really clear understanding of this. There's two separate issues relating to the trees. One is about overshadowing and the potential relationship between the buildings and the trees themselves. The other, in terms of the buffers, is not to do with the relationship of that, it's to do with the biodiversity buffer that it creates. So your SPD, the Landscape and Biodiversity SPD, sets out that the minimum requirement is normally 20 metres, and clearly this is well within that. So all of the garden areas, etc., are within the buffer areas. It completely fails that point, undoubtedly. The part about biodiversity net gain, there is not a 10% requirement at the moment. There is a requirement in the MPPF for a measurable net gain. So in officers' view, it fails that. So there's two kind of hard fails, if you like, on biodiversity grounds. In relation to the flood risk assessment, that is effectively, again, a hard requirement. Your local plan directs that that is a position that should be required. So, Chair, if I would suggest if a way forward is trying to be sought, then at best it would be deferred to seek that information and seek the resolution of the mitigation for the reptiles as a minimum prior to any formal decision being taken to approve. Because I just don't think there's a way in which we could safely approve the application this evening otherwise.
Chair, what we could do is we could have a resolution that it's delegated to Mike's post to approve the application subject to the reptile and flood risk assessment. And then if agreement can't be reached on those matters, it would come back to committee again. But if the agent deals with those matters, then the consent would be issued.
Are you happy with that? Yeah. Councillor House-Sorrell?
I mean, based on those conditions, that doesn't address the buffer zone minimum requirements. I have a question. I don't know if I'm allowed to ask questions of officers now, but if I am allowed, does this fall under a unique exception for this specific application, or does it set a standard for future applications that because we've granted one within the 20 metres?
Thank you, Councillor Harris. I think, as always, each application has merits, but I think this is, in officers' views, this is clear cut. It is simply entirely within, or large, almost entirely within the 20-metre buffer. I don't see how a similar site could be, how it could be judged differently on a similar site. There's nothing exceptional, I suppose, in terms of what's being proposed to enable this to be well within that buffer zone, within effectively straddled by two woodlands. So. It may well be rehearsed back to us in future applications.
Councillor Robertson, are you happy to move it subject to the deferral? Do we have reasons for approval?
Thank you, Chair. Reason for approval is that the overriding need for housing and our lack of 5-year housing land supply outweighs the disadvantages of the objections.
Okay, we could go through a list of conditions if the other points are resolved.
Yeah. So the usual, in accordance with the approved plans, the usual 3-year timescale, details of boundary treatments, details of landscaping, delivery and construction hours to ensure there's no adverse impact on neighbours, parking, cycle provision, in accordance with the tree protection and arboricultural impact assessment and the arboricultural method statement, provision of refuse facilities, the water efficiency condition, which refers to our sustainable development in accordance with policy EM9, electric vehicle charging points, and then our usual informatives around SIL. This will be subject to SIL and contamination and considerate contractors.
Okay, I guess we'll move to the vote then. Right, we have a proposal on the table that's been moved and seconded.
That's your proposal.
The proposal is that the application be delegated to the planning manager to resolve the issues of reptile flooding and grant planning,
And then to grant planning
and
permission
then
if
to
they're
grant
resolved.
planning permission if that's so resolved. So we'll move to vote. Those in favour, please show.
Everybody except one against.
Yeah. Those against? One.
So, ask Lisa.
So that's carried. Can I have a summation from the officer, please?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So, delegated to the Planning Development Manager to resolve the submission of the flood risk assessment and resolve the reptile situation, to grant planning permission subject to the conditions that I referred to earlier.
Thank you. So next item up is 21/0205/full land adjacent to Bourne Valley Inn, Upper Link, St Mary, Bourne.
Bourne. Planning permission is sought for the erection of 2 dwellings alongside a new access as public representations which are in your update paper, and the officer has provided response to those comments. Nitrate neutrality mitigation via the
Way down to the speaking seats. Mr. Parker, right.
My name is Tim Parker on behalf of the residents closest to the proposed development, and we all object to this application. Council, local councillor Carr, residents, the council lands ended for approval. The sweetener for this application is the nutrient offset scheme and the fact local residents and I helped plant a new broadleaf woodland on the hillside above Husband Tarrant a few years ago. However, the major habitat for local owls and other birds of prey. In fact, 60% of this crucial habitat will be lost if this lower link development. Owls require wide open meadows with long grass to hunt and catch their prey, which is mostly field. Link is an oasis of wildlife, and neighbours share wildlife footage and photos. This week, a video was shared of a barn owl catching prey in the meadow on the exact site of the proposed development. The second issue with the proposed woodland is that the soil in the valley is very thin and sits on top of gravel. This is ideal for meadow and forms an excellent floodplain, but is not ideal for large blocks of broadleaf woodland. A very good example of this is in the year 2000, Lower Link residents planted 8 mixed trees, including broadleaf, which were all spaced along the line of an existing hedge. After 23 years, the trees, which are in the exact location of the proposed new woodland, are a few metres tall and could be mistaken for shrubs. I don't think these very slow growth rates and suitability for broadleaf trees have been taken into account in the nutrient offset plan. But there is a much better alternative which could protect the owl habitat and still provide new woodland for nutrient offset. An alternative location for this broadleaf woodland is a hillside paddock a few metres across the road from the site which the applicant owns. Along with guaranteed protection for the whole of the existing large meadow from development, it would result in a far better solution to the nitrate mitigation strategy. This alternative would also prevent the violation of policy EM1 of the adopted local plan. The new woodland should thrive. This hillside woodland is very common along the valley. Another serious issue is that the St Marybourne sewage system is not fit for purpose. Even now in the summer with dry conditions, the sewer is inundated with groundwater, and a round-the-clock shuttle service of sewage pumping tankers is required to keep the toilets in St Marybourne and the valley usable. If approved, this application will add to the number of tankers required on the surrounding country lanes. We ask the committee to refuse this application. However, if it is felt these two houses are critical to ease the housing shortage, then we ask the committee to request the applicant to come back with an alternative nutrient mitigation plan. The plan should fully protect the whole of the existing endangered habitat and enhance the hillside above the valley. This alternative needs to be thoroughly carried out with on-the-ground surveys and should be endorsed by the relevant stakeholders, including birds of prey conservation charities. This area of outstanding natural beauty and site of special site interest deserves a thorough investigation before critical changes are made, which could potentially cause irreplaceable damage. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any questions of Mr. Parker? Thank you very much for your contribution.
Thank you.
Okay, do we have a Mr. Pettit? Welcome to committee. You have 4 minutes when you're ready.
Thank you, Chairman. My name is Mark Pettit. I work for Fowlers, and we prepared and submitted this planning application on behalf of the applicant, Mr. Frank Lee. The application is recommended for approval, and we fully support this recommendation. The application in front of members seeks full planning permission for the erection of a pair of semi-detached dwellings on land immediately to the northwest of Southview Terrace, towards the southern end of St Marybourne. It forms part of a wider field which was the subject of an application for 4 dwellings in 2019-20. In that instance, the application had to be withdrawn due to concerns expressed by a number of consultees, including conservation, landscape and biodiversity. This current application now proposes just 2 modest semi-detached dwellings on a much reduced site area, with a notable gap left to the Bourne Valley Inn in the northwest. The houses will each have 3 bedrooms, which is in line with policy P3 of the neighbourhood plan, and architecturally they have been designed to present themselves as a natural and logical extension to the row of houses seen immediately to the southeast. The Conservation Officer is now much happier with the scheme, and whilst landscape still object, we agree with the Case Officer that the scheme is of a high quality, which would respect the existing development and would be sympathetic to the site's context. In terms of the principle of residential development in this location, whilst the site falls within open countryside, the council accept that they still cannot currently demonstrate a 5-year supply of housing land. It's the presumption in favour of sustainable development that is engaged accordingly. With this in mind, there are no policies in the framework that provide a clear reason for refusing permission in this instance, as confirmed in the committee report. Paragraph 79 of the framework states that to promote sustainable development in rural areas, housing should be located where it will enhance or maintain the vitality of rural communities. The village of St Marybourne is identified by the local plan as a sustainable settlement capable of accommodating growth, and a scheme for 3 dwellings was granted a Development Control Committee last month in the same parish on a site in open countryside. Whilst the site is outside of the defined settlement policy boundary, it is nonetheless within an existing settlement, well related to the village and in close proximity to local services. The site is therefore physically and socially integrated with the settlement. With this in mind, paragraph 68 of the framework confirms that great weight should be given to the benefits of using suitable sites within existing settlements for homes. There will be positive economic benefits of the proposed residential development that are material considerations. The provision of much needed housing provides an immediate boost for the local area, including the construction industry. The addition of 2 households to the local population also has the benefit of helping, in a small but meaningful way, to maintain the viability of local services and the vitality of this rural community. In terms of the social aspects of sustainable development, the development would contribute to the local housing stock, whilst from an environmental point of view, the proposals will be energy efficient, incorporate additional soft landscaping and achieve a biodiversity net gain. So, in summary, in light of its accessibility and the Council's current housing land supply position, it's considered that, in principle, the application site is an acceptable location for residential development. The proposal would occupy a natural and logical plot that is not recognised as being of any importance within the conservation area appraisal or the village design statement. It would make a small but worthwhile contribution to the supply of housing in the borough on a site that's not isolated. In short, the proposals do not fall down against the presumption in favour of sustainable development, as the adverse impacts do not significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. We believe that we have responded positively to the Council's previous concerns with the notable changes that have been made to the scheme, and there are no technical reasons why this application should not be considered favourably. We therefore respectfully request that planning permission be granted accordingly in line with your officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Come on. Time to perfection. Do we have any questions for Mr. Petit? No. Thank you for your contribution. Do we have any questions for officers? Oh, yes, quite a few. Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Chair. One of the sections of some material reasons for refusal that was submitted by one of the ward members refers to policy SS6E, and I think members will appreciate I've got a lot of history behind that one, and it is new housing developments in the countryside outside the settlement policy boundary ought to meet a locally agreed need. Normally this comes from parish councils. Was a housing needs assessment presented with this? I couldn't find anything in the report about it. Because the other question is, does the lack of a 5-year housing supply trump a local housing need under SS6E?
Thank you for your question. Yes, in terms of the housing need assessment, there was nothing provided with the application, but it is worth bearing in mind that SS6 is considered to be out of date because of our housing land supply issue, so therefore less weight is attributed to that policy. So yes, it does fail to comply with SS6 as it stands. but we need to bear in mind the housing allowance supply position.
Thank you. I just wanted to make the point.
Councillor Rattigan.
Thank you, Chair. My viewing of this is that there's 14 houses in semis. Is that confirmed by you as officers?
I couldn't confirm that. I haven't counted them individually myself, but I can check if that was something you were interested
No, I'm just asking if they are 7 semi-detached. So if they are 7 that are in close proximity, I just want to make sure that that's 14 dwellings.
Just having a quick look on the OS plan, I would agree that it looks like 14.
Thank you.
Councillor Faulkner.
I'd have to double check on our system to get you an answer for that one. If they weren't listed in... No. So if they weren't listed, it doesn't mean they weren't necessarily consulted. It probably just means they haven't responded. But I would have to come back and confirm whether they were consulted or not.
Any other questions? Debates? Councillor Faulkner.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, obviously I've got the background knowledge on this because until 2 years ago I was the active ward councillor, and behind my questions to officers was I sat on the flood committee of the Bourne Valley, which included Hampshire, the Water Authority, the Environment Agency, because it's been mentioned that the Bourne Valley, it should never have been built 300 years ago. It's ridiculous. It suffers from flooding from the Bourne rivulet, which is a winter-borne. But the other impossible flooding is the groundwater. And I've actually seen in St Marybourne, the water, because the aquifers, when they fill, the water just comes up and it comes through the floorboards and there's nothing you can do. The whole thing's flooded. But the serious issue is also we had Vitacrest as part of the committee because 300 metres downstream of this proposed development are the waterbeds of Vitacrest, which is the country's best watercress waterbeds, which rely on the chalk stream flowing through them. And Vitacrest employ 500 people. So when we look at the thing on economic benefit, you know, the 500 people employed at Vitacrest is quite significant. Now, we often have emergencies, or we used to, and if the pollution gets into the waterbeds, then the waterbeds are shut down for 9 months to be decontaminated. And that is an environmental catastrophe for all people involved. So I was disappointed that there was nothing in this report that covered the waterbeds, the pollution problem, and the issue, and the section on foul water management was basically non-existent. It will just be covered at some future point. But in the Bourne Valley, it's such a critical issue, it should be covered before applications are considered.
Are you moving refusal?
I'm happy to move refusal, yes.
Well, do I have a seconder? Oh, Councillor Rattigan, you wish to speak?
Thank you, Chair. I was fortunate enough to go on the viewing panel on Friday, and I have to say, I take and I accept Councillor Faulkner's point. It is bizarre, in my view, that we have a flood assessment for the previous application in quite a built-up area, and yet somewhere where water is so important, we don't seem to have a flood assessment. It seems slightly odd that those things are conjoined. Anyway, I was on the viewing panel, and my point earlier about how many dwellings are on there, we cannot section how many each house, how many residents are in each of these houses. Now, a modest housing that looks in line, because that's where we stood in the middle of the road with the possibility of death, but to see that the street the street scene would be very similar, in my view, to what is there already, and it looked a natural extension of semi-detached homes. Yes, I accept that it is infilling a gap, but it's a gap between housing and a pub. You know, it's not it's not as though this is something special that the pub will create noise, disturbance, all of those things. And in reality, I think the report outlines the ability to deliver these houses. I don't like the housing 5-year land supply being the ultimate decider on things, but I think the reasons for approval are substantive enough to support it. And we all know that the delivery of 2 smaller homes is probably better than an executive home of 5 bedrooms in this location, and therefore I am going to support the officer recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Faulkner, in moving refusal, do you have some planning reasons for refusal?
Well, there were other issues I would address. We had the appeal end of last year where the appeal inspector upheld the fact that there shouldn't be development in an AONB in a conservation area unless there are exceptional circumstances. And I saw nothing in the reports to say there was any exceptional circumstances. The applicant mentioned we approved last month 3 houses up the hill, but that was up the hill next to a garage in a garden, whereas this is agricultural undeveloped land. It's a completely different situation. So the reasons for using the 5-year land supply, I don't believe are valid in this particular case. So there are those reasons, i.e. the policy reasons, plus the specifics that I've mentioned in terms of the flood assessments, etc. So I don't know if you can pick out the reasons from that lot.
I'd like our planning manager to comment at this point.
Thank you, Chair. So just because I appreciate we didn't respond to Councillor Faulkner's question in the first place because we were just looking it up on the system. The Environment Agency were not consulted, and partly the reason for that is the size of the development and the fact that it's in flood zone 1. So I respect what you say about the local knowledge, etc. But in terms of the requirement to consult, there wasn't one, and there wasn't a requirement to go any further on that. In relation to foul drainage, yes, it is covered by condition set out in the report. That doesn't lose the council's control. It just means that it pushes it to a different stage of the permission. In terms of the points raised in relation to supporting a motion for refusal, Councillor Faulkner, you mentioned exceptional circumstances. I believe that might be in relation to the 26-house scheme that was at the appeal hearing. Yeah, so that the difference between that scheme and this scheme in planning policy terms is its scale. So that is what would be determined major development in the AONB. We need to demonstrate exceptional circumstances. The policy test here is slightly different, and effectively it is the paragraph 11, whether there of the MPPF, whether there's any clear reasons to refuse. Impact on AONB can be that, but it needs to be a level of harm where you consider there would be a clear reason to refuse. The reasons why that bar hasn't been reached in the officer's recommendation is because of the size, the scale, proximity to existing dwellings, etc., as explained. So overall, it's not considered in terms of the way it's set out in the report that clear reason for refusal has been met, and that is the reason for the recommendation in those terms. In essence, I do recognise the points you raise around the flood risk concerns, but there's no evidential basis in which we'd be able to take that forward in terms of having reasons for refusal to support an appeal on that basis.
Councillor Faulkner, do you wish to proceed with recommendation given the advice you've just had from the planning manager?
Yeah, I'm slightly flabbergasted because the one thing I missed was the neighbourhood plan. I just wonder what was the point of St Marybourne coming up with a neighbourhood plan. I'm just totally bewildered. It's like every policy's been turned upside down. So I'd like to continue with it, but whether it succeeds is another issue, I suppose.
Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. I could almost support the officer recommendation, except for the reason that Councillor Faulkner's raised regarding the sewage. It's a problem we've got in my ward, other side of the borough, and it is absolute total misery for those people who are affected by it. And to have this affect a major food source that we have in this borough, I can't support it with this. So I will second Councillor Faulkner's recommendation for refusal, totally based on the flooding issues.
But just for clarification, that's for reasons of sewage.
Right, sewage and surface water. That needs to be sorted before this goes ahead. The rest of it, I'm quite content with. It's purely the flood risk and sewage issues.
Chair, I wonder whether Councillor Faulkner may consider asking the committee that this application be deferred so that we can look at these issues, because there's very little information before the committee on this issue, and you've heard there is no evidence that would enable us to substantiate that at this moment in time. But if officers went away and looked at the issues and then bring a report back to next meeting, would that?
Yeah, I'd be happy with that. Yeah, and I'd really like, because of this, the Environment Agency and Southern Water to be contacted and ask for a proper report. Southern Water has spent 2 million on this valley, on sewage, for a population of not a lot. So it's a very serious issue.
Chair, I think Councillor Robinson is happy with that, so if you take a vote on deferral.
Okay, so mover and second are happy with deferral. We have a motion in front of us for deferral. Those in favour of deferral, please show. 1, 2, 3.
Is everybody unanimous?
Yeah, okay. That's carried.
So I can confirm that application has been deferred to a later committee to look into and investigate the sewage issues surrounding the proposed development.
Thank you. Moving on to the next item, land adjacent to Byes Lane, Silchester. And I understand we have some speakers. Oh, and Councillor Durant, you're wishing to remove yourself for this item.
Let the officer present first. So officer first.
Okay, so if we could have the officer presentation, please.
So this is a application at land adjacent to Byes Lane in Silchester. Planning permission is sought for the conversion and extension of the site's barn to a 3-bedroom dwelling. The development would be served by parking, turning, landscaping and a private amenity area. With regard to updates, Councillor Durant provided further comments in support of his comments provided in the officer's report. He provided these late, so I'll provide them verbally. He stated that Silchester is very limited in sites for development. The green, the common land and the developed centre do not provide opportunities for development. As we have seen in other recent applications for Silchester, development is very much restricted to single properties, and this is the only way much needed development can take place. In relation to the officer's report, just a small correction where it's been referred to as the building and the redundancy of the building have not been addressed. Information was provided, and that is a typo, so disregard the element relating to the comments relating to the building no longer having a purpose. This application is recommended for refusal as per the reasons stated within the officer's report. Namely, the application is located in an isolated location and the development would result in adverse landscape impacts.
Thank you. So I have 3 people down to speak in support, no objections. So Mr. Pettit and Mr. and Mrs. Kane. Thank you. Welcome to committee. Somehow you've got to work out how you're going to share 4 minutes between you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. I'm here with the applicants, Peter and Corinne Kame, who have lived in the parish for over 9 years. The application that is in front of members is seeking permission to convert a redundant barn into a 3-bedroom dwelling at a time when the council cannot currently demonstrate a 5-year supply of housing land. The application site does not fall within an AONB, a conservation area, flood risk zone, nitrate zone, and is not close to any listed buildings. It's the type of location that lends itself to a sympathetically designed barn conversion, and in this respect there is support at both a local and national level. Indeed, whilst the site falls within the open countryside, policy SS6 of the local plan permits the reuse of redundant or disused buildings in locations such as this, as does paragraph 80 of the framework. In this respect, the officer accepts that the barn is genuinely redundant and that it is structurally capable of conversion. However, he has raised concerns with regards to the site's location and the impact that the development would have on the landscape character and visual amenity of the area. The officer considers the site to fall within a location that is isolated and that has limited access to services and facilities. However, there's no requirement under policy SS6 or paragraph 80 of the framework for conversion schemes of this nature not to be isolated. It's also worth noting that the proposed development is likely to generate a similar or even lower number of traffic movements than the existing barn could if it was in full-time intensive agricultural use. In this respect, it would be a more sustainable form of development than what is seen at present, and thus an appropriate location for a single dwelling. From a landscape point of view, the officer has raised concerns with the introduction of domestic paraphernalia. However, surely this is an inevitable consequence of any such residential conversion scheme. It seems perverse to have a policy that allows the reuse of buildings such as this, and then to object on the basis that there will be associated garden land, hard-standing washing lines and the like. If we didn't provide these, then I'd expect an objection would be raised on amenity grounds. So set against this backdrop, we do not consider that the proposals will adversely affect the rural character of the area. The building will continue to appear as a barn-like structure in an open agricultural setting. Indeed, the proposed dwelling and its associated curtilage represents a very small proportion of the applicant's wider holding. In terms of urbanising the site, you will see on the proposed site plan that the applicants are proposing a significant amount of new planting in and around the site. This will soften the impacts of the proposed development and allow it to nestle comfortably into this location. With regards to hard surfacing, the applicants intend to put something here that is appropriate for a rural setting, for example, a buff-coloured gravel. This would enhance the immediate setting of the building more so than the existing hardcore does, as will the additional soft landscaping. In addition, the applicants are also proposing to enhance the ecological setting of the barn through incorporating a number of biodiversity enhancements as part of this scheme. These will include bat and bird boxes and insect bricks. This is consistent with the approach that the applicants have taken on the rest of their holding already, where they've incorporated ecological enhancements as part of their organic vineyard. There are no technical reasons why this application shouldn't be approved, and no objections have been raised by the parish council or any members of the public. Whilst it's regrettable that some of the planting along the front of the site is being removed, this will result in a much safer access point. None of the trees or hedgerows are of any ecological or arboricultural value, and some of it will need to be removed in the near future anyway, as it is suffering from ash dieback. In summary, the site is considered to be an appropriate location for a sympathetic barn conversion of the nature proposed. The development would make a small but worthwhile contribution to the council's ongoing housing land supply issue on an unconstrained site. Whilst landscape harm has been identified by the officer, this has not been informed by internal landscape advice, and every effort has been made by the applicants to soften the impact of the development and allow it to sit comfortably in this location. We do not consider that the proposals fall down against the presumption in favour of sustainable development, as the adverse impacts do not significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. We therefore respectfully request that planning permission be granted accordingly, contrary to your officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions? Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. I've got two questions. Firstly, how far is this building from the Silchester Farm wedding venue? And how much work will you be doing in terms of removing trees and hedgerows? Thank you.
The site's about 350 metres away from Silchester Farm. In terms of tree and hedgerow removal, that's just limited to a couple of sections along the road frontage. where we're having to take some out to facilitate the visibility displays in both directions. I think in one direction it's a small section of holly hedge, and then in the other direction there's some hedgerow and some ash trees which are suffering from dieback, and like I said, they'll have to be removed in the future anyway, irrespective of what happens with this planning application. As part of the proposals, we've put forward replacement planting behind the visibility displays, and also you see additional hedgerow planting around the curtilage and along the driveway. And we're happy to accept a planning condition requiring a soft landscaping scheme to be dealt with or agreed prior to any development commencing if that was considered necessary.
Councillor Howard Sorrell.
Thank you, Chair. We received an email from Mrs. Corinne Kame, I think I'm saying that right, which addressed some of the points raised in the report, but one of the things it talked about was that there's technically a shop nearby and it's on a bus route, but within our report there's a discussion of the meaning of the term isolated development within the countryside, and it specifically denotes isolated physically rather than access to services. So do you have any comments around how we should take it in terms of isolation within the countryside, because the services isn't really something we can consider?
As I said in my speech, the matter of isolation is, to my mind, is irrelevant to this application, because you have a policy in the local plan which allows conversion of buildings to residential dwellings. There's no requirement for it not to be isolated. And that is entirely consistent with paragraph 80 of the framework. The National Planning Policy Framework says you can have isolated homes in the countryside where it involves the reuse of redundant or disused buildings. So whether the site's isolated or not, to my mind, is not relevant.
Councillor Bound.
Thank you, Chair. Could I just ask a question about the design? Essentially, are you just putting windows and doors into what exists? Because that's the way I take it from the plans in front of me.
Yeah, I mean, all we're proposing externally is some windows and doors and a very small porch on the, I think it's the eastern side or southeastern elevation. That's it. We've tried to respect the character of the building so that when you look at it as a dwelling, it would still appear as a barn-like structure, which we think is a sympathetic approach.
No more questions? Thank you very much for your contribution. Any questions for officers? Councillor Howard-Sorrell.
Is what we've just heard entirely accurate? I mean, based on your recommendation, presumably you don't agree, but do our policies negate the isolated argument?
So firstly, obviously, we look at policy SS6, and that talks about conversion of barns. So obviously, under that section C, there's several elements. I think I have been through them all in my report, and it comes to criteria VI, which talks about leads for enhancement to the immediate setting. So I've come to the conclusion that I don't think it leads to an enhancement. There is landscape harm, so the application fails to comply with that criteria. So I've then moved on to the NPPF, which has a very similar policy requirement, which also looks at development and reuse of redundant disused buildings to enhance its immediate setting. I once again consider there to be landscape harm, as spit out in my report, so I consider it to fail paragraph 80. So whilst those policies in themselves don't require this look at isolation, we're not looking at it in light of those policies because it fails those policies. So then I go back to the sustainable development paragraph 11D, so in terms of the housing land supply officer issue, which then does require us to look at the isolation, sustainable development, does it meet those requirements? I'll set out in my report, I don't believe it does. It doesn't meet those policy requirements because of landscape harm, and it isn't considered to be sustainable because of the distances and there would be a demand for private use of car, and in an area of climate change would be promoting something that isn't sustainable. So yeah, that's my take and my view on those policies.
Thank you. Any more questions? Councillor Rattigan. Okay, we'll move on to debate. Councillor Rattigan.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate that very much. We've had this, I hate to refer back to item 1 again, but in item 1, we saw close proximity of other buildings, other forms. In fact, the school within walking distance. Although I obviously support SS6 for the development of brownfield sites, it is, in my view, a stretch that this site should be considered for development. I understand that the form may be similar to what is currently there, but there is an urbanisation of lights and everything as night falls. There wouldn't be that with a barn, and therefore it is an urbanisation and therefore has particular problems. The picture that you had of the landscape earlier up demonstrates that this is within a area that would blight, that we should not consider the siting of these in regard to our housing land supply. Frankly, one dwelling is not likely to enhance our movement from 4.2 to 5.2. And I genuinely believe that the officers have laid out well the reasons for refusal, and I will be moving that refusal. Thank you.
Right, we have a mover for refusal. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. I look at the reasons that have been given for refusal, and I can't agree with them. I 5 nights a week. I've been to events there myself, having 200 to 300 people. A couple of months ago, we approved a farm shop on the same site. A couple of months ago, we also approved some overnight pods for visitors to stay. The number 14 bus passes the end of the road. There are other houses of character. That facility that is there of the wedding venue has already eroded it. There is no urban countryside character to erode. It's gone because the residents in that area are putting up with loud music, playing night after night after night, up until midnight, that you can hear all across the village. Litigation involved. That rural setting has been totally eroded by the facility that is there. So I can't agree with the reasons for refusal. The other one is the subdivision of the field. I looked at the picture that we had up a minute ago of the barn, and that's just a barn that's stuck in the middle of the field. It's an incongruous setting for any building. It would look a lot better if it had some definition, some curtilage around it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bound.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I tend to agree with Councillor Robinson's in terms of the look of the building at the moment. It looks rather incongruous where it is. I don't think it will be improved at all by being turned into a house. That's why I asked about the design. Basically, it's still a barn in the countryside as far as I can see, which has been touched apparently is, what, 350, who knows, 350 metres away, which is a considerable distance as far as I'm concerned. And the introduction of the domestic paraphernalia that the officer talks about around the building leads me to feel that I shall be refusing this. Well, I will be supporting the officer recommendation on this.
Are you seconding?
I will second.
Thank you. So we have a proposal on the table that's been moved and seconded. I think I had Councillor Howell-Sorrell and then Councillor Goddison. Okay, Councillor Howell-Sorrell.
That's fine. I was going to second it. So.
Councillor Robinson, I think the reasons for refusal are very, very weak. Councillor Durrant's comments on page 171 are pithy, straight to the point, and in my opinion, very relevant. And personally would not wish to support an application.
For refusal, I'll take a vote now. Those in favour of refusal, please show.
4, 5, 6.
6. And those against?
1, 2.
Thank you. So I can confirm that the application has been refused as per the officer's report.
Thank you. Right. Welcome back, Councillor Durrett.
Thank you, Chair. This is one of two applications, items 4 and 5, which relate to the same property. One, this item here is the householder, and the next item is a concurrent listed building consent application. We'll be considering them as two separate items. So the proposal is for a single-storey rear extension, including excavation works to the rear garden and the erection of a new retaining wall at Blagrove Cottage. You will see that the proposal shows a flat-roofed rear extension onto the southern elevation, extending beyond the existing two-storey extension. And the proposal is of a contemporary modern design. Members have had the benefit of viewing the application site on Friday. I'd also like to remind members of the statutory legislation in respect of dealing with applications in relation to heritage assets. Page 197 of the report refers to sections 60 to have special regard to the desirability of preserving a listed building or its setting, and also land within conservation areas. Again, that's special duty to preserve and enhance the character and appearance of the area. This is further reinforced in the framework itself, and again, page 198 refers you to the relevant paragraphs therein, to the conservation area appraisal, which emphasises the importance of this building within the conservation area, drawing specific reference to its longitudinal form and prominence within the conservation area itself. As noted in the report, the dwelling has already benefited from a two-storey extension to the rear, and this further extension would abut and create a further excessive depth. The officer recommendation is for refusal in terms of the size, scale, design of the extension, in that it would result in less substantial harm to the significance of the listed building, and would also not preserve or enhance the character and appearance of the conservation area.
If you'd like to come forward. Welcome to committee. When you're ready, you'll have 4 minutes. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, councillors, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. My husband David and I have lived at Blagrove Cottage for over a third of our lives, and we've grown very attached to it. We spent a lot of time in creating a far more practical kitchen and the opportunity to view the garden. But unfortunately, the build of the oak frame facing the garden was much less successful. In high winds and rain, water is driven into the cottage, appearing as steady drips from the ceiling. And in fact, it's rather like bailing yourself out of a boat in the height of, autumn and winter storms. In the winter months, the seating area is cold and drafty and not really at all comfortable to sit in. It's been a huge disappointment, and it should have been the highlight of the development. And in fact, we have had numerous attempts to repair the situation, but it's just not worked, and we've spent 16 years living with this. In this plan put before you, we're seeking to design out the deficiencies and provide a panoramic view of the garden and to improve the comfort in the area, which is the heart of our cottage. The design is deliberately modern to distinguish it from the original, an approach which the architect favours for historic buildings. This is supported in the comment from Historic Environment, who notes it's not attached to the original. The design is very much influenced by the latest building regulations concerning overheating and solar gain, hence the large glass panels and the overhanging roof. This captures energy from a low altitude sun in the winter, but prevents the sun's strongest rays reaching the glass at the height of the summer. Together with high levels of insulation, this free energy is expected to reduce our heating bills. In an old cottage with generally poor levels of insulation in the walls and few options to improve it, this sort of innovation should be welcomed in our drive towards net zero. It's only a generation away. I know that the planning department is particularly concerned about the impact of the site of this design on the conservation area. We believe it will be virtually zero, as most hedges are evergreen and the beech, if considered deciduous, retains its dead leaves over the winter. There is no longer a view from the south due to the height of the hedge. From the road over a small wall, it's possible to see the second story and the thatch of the 2007 extension. But the single-story garden room will sit well below this. Importantly, the view of the front of the cottage looking south up Blaygrove Lane remains as it has been for over 400 years. Ironically, on the front cover of last weekend's Sunday Times home section, I found a picture of a smaller 16th century Grade 2 listed thatch cottage with near identical glass box extension on the side. It's located in the Mendips, overlooked by the ruins of Farley Hungerford Castle, and therefore most likely in a conservation area. The glass box on this building is 33 metres square, as opposed to ours, which is only 19 metres square. We're hoping that you'll allow us to add 8% to the floor area, which is hardly an overdevelopment.
If you could sum up now, thanks.
We have to say that we do agree with the owner of the Mendip cottage, who said, if planners make things too restrictive and you can't ever modernise or adapt it for the way people live now, it's less likely that these houses will be preserved. Thank you for listening. And by the way, I know we're not allowed to bring pictures or plans, but I have actually got pictures from the Sunday Times. I hope that perhaps some of you might have seen them.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any questions? Councillor Howard Sorrell.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your information. It's been quite helpful for my understanding of this application.
I'm really sorry, but I can't hear what you're saying.
No, that's absolutely fine. Thank you for...
Switch the microphone on.
Your microphone.
Oh, that'll be it. So, your microphone is still on if you could press the button.
Sorry, I mean,
press
my
the
husband
right-hand
will answer
button.
the question for me.
If you press the right-hand button on the mic, it will switch it off.
What, here?
Yes.
Here?
On the machine.
That's it.
Once more.
Switch it off to the light was off.
Can you hear me now? Okay, sorry, sorry about all that. Thank you for giving us some information. The main issue within our report seems to be the Historic Environments team's objection. They have said that it constitutes an overdevelopment. Your wife spoke on that issue somewhat. My question for you really is simple. You've talked a little bit about the impact not being especially visible to the public, but part of conservation is conserving the building for future generations who might live in the property or whether it ever becomes open to the public. So do you have any comments around the protection of the building for future generations, for posterity's sake, rather than now the impact on the public's perception of the building, if that makes sense?
Can you switch the mic on, sorry, the right-hand button?
Sorry, the public's perception. around where we are is that they're all perfectly happy with it. We have had no objections about our development, none at all. And I think, you know, you have to understand that architecturally, modern glass structures that are carefully created to keep, you know, to give you solar gain in the winter, they're regarded as quite beautiful. You see them all over Victorian buildings in London. And you know, I found a 16th century cottage, which is what ours is. Ours was built in 1592, was it?
1569.
1569. And it looks attractive. You know, we have to move on because
I'm going to have to move
it's very
things on.
difficult. We have to accept houses with low tie beams, and the insulation is very poor.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions? Thank you very much for your contribution. Do we have any questions of officers? Okay. Councillor Goddison, Councillor Robinson, then Councillor Sorrell, then Councillor Durant.
Thank you, Chair. I was able to go on the viewing panel, and I'll be very interested to hear one or two points for those who were unable to be on the viewing panel. Firstly, I'd like to point out that this is a very modest extension to an extension. It is not attached to the original listed building in any way of the main originally listed building. The other point I'd like to emphasise is that you cannot, as Councillor Tuck has said, this extension is not visible from the public footpath, is actually an evergreen hedge and is constantly in leaf. So the impact on the conservation area is virtually non-existent. And of course, to adapt to modern living. And have been inside this cottage. It's a typical 16th century cottage, very low ceilings now, and it's very important to have an area where there's a bit of elbow room. And the original extension was put on to achieve that, and this modest increase in the so I would I'll be interested to hear what particularly what other people who are on the viewing panel have to say, but I'm not inclined to support the.
Thank you, Chair. I'm fortunately lucky to live in a 17th century cottage, and so I do understand all the problems that the applicant. And I look at this proposal, and 1 minute we're being told that it's an extension to an extension, and then the next minute we're being told that building, I don't understand how it's protecting it. It's only protecting the relatively modern extension. And the proposal talks about removal of oak framing and existing glacis and things like that. As we've said, it's an extension on top of an extension. So I don't see how it protects the original building at all. And it's a building that's already been extended. And this is another step, and it's another erode big problems. But I don't think this is the right way to go about it. I think there's a better way to solve the problems. I've seen it done in other buildings where I live, and it can be done without putting a glazed extension onto another extension. So I do support the officer recommendation. Thank you.
Councillor Robinson, are you moving the recommendation?
Yeah.
I agree with Councillor Godison, actually, on this issue. I think it doesn't do that much damage to the original building in terms of it's not particularly detrimental. You can still appreciate the historic nature of the building because it is an extension to an extension. I understand the concerns around, oh, it's not really protecting the original building, but it is protecting the extension, which is now part of the overall structure of the house. So I think this small adaptation is sort of and move for approval, but not sure I'm allowed to do that at the moment.
You
So we'll
can't
see what
move
happens.
when there's a
that's fine.
moved one. Okay. Councillor Durant.
Thank you, Chair. I do agree with both councillors who've just spoken. I think some buildings need to evolve. There's a process. This building has evolved once. I have no idea how many changes have been made over the years since the 1500s, but there were probably a few. And I think in this case, where it's actually making the dwelling more, I'll say more habitable, and is offering some environmental and energy savings, I don't see it as being a massive issue on this property. So I would not support the recommendation to refuse.
Thank you. Councillor Bound.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I had the benefit of going on the viewing panel on Friday and seeing the building as it is now, in situ, obviously. I don't think it has a great, that the proposal would have a great effect on, is it Blaygrove Lane? But from the garden, it will have a huge effect, I believe, on the original, the fabric of the original building. I mean, personally, I don't think I would have agreed with the original extension myself, but it is there now, and it has sort of weathered. To put a flat roof extension onto an extension, I think is a step too far, and I totally agree with the officer recommendation, and also what Councillor Robinson has already said. Thank you.
Councillor Bound, are you happy to second the recommendation? Thank you. Councillor Hussey?
Just very briefly, I understand all the comments that have been made about the need to adapt to modern living, but inside a box that's stuck on a Grade 2 listed building, it certainly doesn't enhance the existing building visually. It doesn't conserve the character of the building. I'm not being funny when I say I could build that with Lego bricks. I support the officer recommendation.
And Councillor Miller?
I won't add to what's been said because I agree with it in the last two speakers. Thank you, Chair.
And Councillor Rattigan?
Thank you, Chair. I accept that there is sometimes a need to reset duals, and this is obviously a dual, and the front elevation, which is not affected, is good. I just cannot, in my good conscience, support a flat roof on the extension as it stands, and I think it provides harm from the viewing site of the garden, and actually the flat roof, although it may be environmentally beneficial, does not enhance the building or the rear of the building, and although you will be able to define the first extension and the second extension, that is not a reason to support this application, and I will be supporting the officer recommendation.
Okay, so the recommendation has been moved and seconded. We'll now move to vote. Those in favour of refusal, please show. That's 7. So those against? 1, 2, 3. Okay, that's carried. Okay, we've just gone 8 o'clock.
Yep, so the application has been refused for the reasons set out in the main paper.
Okay, we'll take item 5 and then we'll go for a break after that. So that's listed building consent. Can we have a proposer?
I move the officer recommendation.
And the second. Those in favour of the recommendation, please show. No, 9. Those against? One. Okay. Thank you. So we'll have a brief break now for 5 minutes, and then we'll be back in the chamber for the remaining items. Thank you, everyone. Okay, if we're all back, we shall resume the meeting. Item 6, 41 Foyle Park.
Of the roof to form a first floor with front and rear dormers. There are no updates with this application, and the application is recommended for permission as set out within the officer's report.
Thank you. And we don't have any public speakers lined up? Okay, councillors, do you have any questions you'd like to raise with officers? Okay, well, we'll move on to debate then. Councillor Miller?
Yep, I understand from the report there's windows is not characteristic, but I'm looking at Google Maps and on Street View here at the moment, and just down the road there's certainly another one that's had its roof raised and had the dormers. In the report it states that the entrance to Foyle Road has chalet bungalows. So I have got no problem with the officer's recommendation on this one, Chair. Thank you very much.
Any other comments before we move to vote? Okay, let's move to vote. And those in favour of the recommendation, please show.
Thank you, Chairman. So the application has been recommended for approval as per the conditions in the officer's report.
And officer presenting, if you'd like to say a few words.
Yes, thank you, Chair. This is Chair. There is no update to report. The proposal is considered acceptable and turned in the main paper.
Thank you. Now, I understand we did have Councillor Murray Campbell from the Parish Council as Chair, and welcome to committee. When you're ready, you'll have...
Thank you. Old Basing and Lichfield Parish Council had 3 objections to this. Been enlarged. This particular frontage is very solid compared. There'd only be a 100mm gap between of the master bedroom in number 91. You can see where the first floor bedroom window coming from the right-hand side, and a little bit of natural light coming through obscured glass of the roof of 91's living room. All year, it's where they're relaxed. Important is loss of privacy, because I think if I lived at 91, our neighbours.
Welcome
to speak to the committee tonight. However, policy EM10 was clear that extensions should amenity for occupants of developments and neighbouring properties, layout, appearance, architectural good architecture. For the officer's assessment that the floor level the separation distance between true sense of separation, giving the appearance of 1 or 2 metres between the houses. All if overwhelmed by rainfall, that this will increase the potential for damage to our property during the construction. Indeed, the lack of separation alone provides of the extension beyond the main building line at the rear. This roof light is not shown on the planning we can agree with, as clearly shown within our objection. Post-extension will also clearly and significantly conflict with sustainability supplementary planning document. Made more oppressive by the shading and loss of daylight, there will be on achieving high-quality designs and precision until a site visit can be organised with the.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions?
Could you tell me what the your building at 91?
I have a throat infection at the moment, that's why I presented it that way in the 2. And it's to that extent.
If the building goes ahead, the bedroom ups that you've got, what function goes?
Area, TV, socialising area. To the planning officer, there is a direct view.
We have Mr. Fryer down to speak, and Mr. Done with that, and you're ready to start. You've got 4 minutes to share.
And this is Mr. Lee Fryer, agent. Recently moved into Old Basing to be part of the community. I'm huge. A lot of them are kind of friends and family, copy and paste. A lot of the same that would actually complement a 4-bedroom house, which ironically, barring the key points as we've been through the process, we wanted to keep it match the gable that's already on the right of the property. To the proposal, the one in favour is pretty much the only house in all behind it, but we'll be keeping the garage door because I feel that from the street scene, from the 4 to 5 cars. The overall footprint won't be we'll just be going directly up from that, so that won't be changing the site. So as you can see from the rear extension, we're planning to go projecting about 7.6 metres out, so we will be running in parallel to that, just 2.2. You don't get much light there anyway, at least in the evening, light in the evening there anyway. The 45-degree block part of their view into our garden.
1 minute left.
Rather than it won't change their view into their garden or other neighbouring gardens or the distance beyond.
Designed together, which complements the existing house, the character of the existing street scene. The proposal is to not go any closer to that. It's to enable them to grow from a 3-bed to a 4-bedroom dwelling. It feels to me like it is a very worthwhile development in a way, and designed in a way which is again sympathetic to 91. So the overall look and feel will not be of one individual dwelling, but more as two separate, and therefore recommendation for approval.
Thank you. Do we have any questions for the applicant agent?
If the application is approved and building goes ahead, could it, yes, looking at that picture, you've got the extension going along the side of that. How on earth do you intend to access the guttering in order, if should it get blocked up, when there's only cause water to run down either the side of your building or the side of 91 or both?
Yeah, so I'll answer that. The slimline fascia and soffit, which will give no less water capture than a normal guttering would do. So there should be no difference in a normal gutter performance.
Considering it'll be running along an area that far, where the two walls are that far apart. How
a ladder would go to the front of the guttering as it would to the side. A ladder would go to the front of the property to access and use a gutter clearing method, as it would if maximum 1.5 to 2 metres long.
Okay. Okay, you've had 3 bites of the cherry now, Councillor Goddison. Councillor Freeman.
Thank you, Chair. On a Saturday morning.
Sorry, could you switch your microphone on?
Apologies. If you put a window as a skylight window in a property when you extend it in an area where extensions are increasing, I would say you'd need to put that in there with the understanding that someone may move in next door and may extend at some point.
When the VLAC will probably do not much more than what is already being done by the existing bedrooms of 93 in terms of looking towards that VLAC. So there would be a slight closer, but not exaggerated. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. There being no more questions, so thank you, gentlemen, very much for your contribution.
Thank you.
Could you switch the microphone off? Thank you.
You might not have considered the skylight when putting your recommendations forward. Is that the case, or has it been considered? Because he seemed to be doubtful, and I just want to put his mind at ease. So.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Each application, as you know, is a site is visited by the officer. These photos were taken by the officer. You can clearly see from that site visit all of the relevant openings, and therefore I can confirm that that skylight has been taken into consideration within the officer's assessment.
Councillor Faulkner.
Thank you, Chair. Can you give us guidance on, there was a comment regarding, from the planning point of view, the proximity to a border, and that raises the issue, if you've got permission right on a border, how do you then build it? Because you don't have any land on which to build.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, whether you can build, it's not a material planning consideration. I mean, clearly, if you are needing access to another's property, then that's a matter between the two parties.
There's a act, the Party Wall Act, that sets out the procedures for doing that.
Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Chair. What we've got is a situation where 91 has been extended right to the boundary, and 93, which was a mirror image property of it, now wishes to do exactly the same. But because of the previous extension to 91, it is actually giving a terracing effect. How do we deal with that?
Yeah, this will be a similar extension to that to next door. You're just looking at two properties. Yes, the gap will be reduced, but the assessment is whether that be harmful on the impact of the would that have a harmful impact on the character of the street scene and the immediate area, and our assessment is that it would not on this particular occasion.
Councillor Rattigan.
Thank you, Chair. In planning terms, is there an acceptable separation between two properties? Is there guidelines on that?
There's no set guideline. Clearly, every site has to be looked at in its immediate context, and there's not one size fits all. So you have to make that assessment in each case, having regard to the context and the surrounding area.
And can you confirm that there is no right to light in these planning applications?
Yeah, we obviously take into the impact on residential amenity in terms of overbearing impacts, overshadowing, loss of light, loss of privacy, and that's detailed within the report. Our assessment is that it's acceptable.
Councillor Bound.
Just looking at that picture that we have there, presumably it's number 91 on the left, and is that the extension that's coming out from 93 on the right?
Yes, that's correct. The skylight that's being referred to is
So
in
the
the picture.
Yeah, all the way around the numbers.
Sorry.
Yeah.
So the skylight can already be looked through, can it, from that top right-hand corner?
I think it would be quite difficult. The angle's quite oblique. I think it would be quite difficult to see down in there, albeit that officers haven't gone into the property itself and carried out that exercise. We feel that it will be quite a difficult angle to actually look down into it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, no more questions. Question or debate? Okay, debate. You go first.
I share the concern about the proximity, but if I look at the block plan, there's houses in sort of, I would say, equally or near close proximity in the area between the two properties. And I take the comment that you'd really have to want to look into the skylight to see anything from that bedroom window. So I don't see it as the problem that has been put forward. So personally, I'm happy with the officer's recommendation.
Councillor Miller.
I'm quite prepared to second that, Chair. And going back over the years.
Sorry, it's just a point of order. Councillor Durant, were you moving? You didn't move.
Yes.
You are moving.
Oh yeah, I will. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, I understood that he was.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Formally, I'll second that. And over the years, we've had these proximity discussions time and time again. I remember in Kemp Shop we had a particularly, almost exactly the same, and I think the officers might correct me. I think it's more down to how they construct it is their problem. Quite happy to go along with the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. Could we have the picture from the back garden up again? Thank you. Just looking at that picture and referring it to the plan, the block plan on page 244. If you look at that skylight, it's very roughly central to that rear extension longitudinally. And you refer to the block plan, the back wall of the new extension is probably 2/3 of the way along that extension. So to actually look out of a back bedroom window into that skylight, you are actually going to hang out the window and look round over the corner. You are going to have to make a determined effort to look into that window. And if that's what your neighbour's doing, you've got bigger problems than this. So that just doesn't hold any water for me whatsoever. In terms of construction, I know it's not a planning issue, but the construction will be no different from the existing garage construction. You're having a gable up against your boundary. The fact it's another 10 feet higher isn't going to make the slightest bit of difference whatsoever. So I really don't get the objections on this. I think once it's all built and all settled down, everybody will be not happy, but will accept the situation as being acceptable. Thank you.
I'm conscious, were there any other speakers? Councillor Howell-Sorrell?
I was in two minds about this. I do have quite a lot of sympathy for Mr. Green. I wouldn't be thrilled if I were the neighbour in this situation. And the overlooking is an issue. I think the bigger issue is the fact that there'll only be 10 centimetre gap. Once the extension there does make it quite an ugly property. Not to put too fine a point on it, but yeah, I wouldn't want to live there because it just looks a little bit silly. But if it gains you more space, you do you. Mr. Green, I have purchased some film off Amazon for about £3 that you apply with water to make my window clouded to stop my neighbours looking through my windows. So that would be my suggestion to you. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to go with the recommendation and approve.
Okay, being no more speakers, I have a motion on the table. Those in favour of approval, please show. That's 7. And those against? That's 1. Okay, that's carried. Abstentions? Some people not lifting their hands. Okay. Thank you. If we can have the decision.
Yep, the application is approved as per the officer's recommendation and for the reasons and conditions in the main report.
Thank you. Right, nearly home now. Item number 8, Pirates Cottage, Tubbs Lane, Highclere. Yeah, officer presenting if you'd like to lead.
Thank you. So this application is at Pirates Cottage in Highclere. Planning permission is sought for the erection of a shed. In relation to the updates, all we'd seek to do is amend condition 1, which refers to the block location and block plan, and we'd seek to remove that purely because of an inconsistency between the red line edge, and that won't change the recommendation going forward. The plan is shown on the site, the position of the shed is shown on the site plan, so that will have no impact. And the application is recommended for permission subject to the conditions set out in the report.
Thank you. Do we have a Mr. Runcie still in the house? Thank you for your patience. Speaking in support of the application, when you're ready, you've got 4 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you for allowing me to present. I'll try and keep it brief. Site has been subject to a number of applications since the original PIP approval. There were a number of objections to the original application and to all subsequent technical discharge, full and variation applications. The objections on this application stem from the original application and the principle of development of the site. The application before you is for a shed. The approved landscape design already allows for a shed to be erected on site for bin and cycle storage, but of a slightly smaller scale and in a slightly different location. The proposed shed is sited near the new house, which is under construction, not visible from any public areas and outside all root protection areas. I trust that you all agree this proposal is acceptable and grant approval. Thank you.
Wow, that was quick. Any questions? Any questions for Mr. Runcie? No, thank you very much for your contribution and wish you a good night. Any questions of officers? Councillor Faulkner.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah. Is there a garage missing on this site plan? Because there was an application for a garage which I thought had been approved.
No, the garage is not missing. There's a currently pending application for a garage. So there's at the moment, and that's a separate planning application, so it's not shown on this application.
Another question on the same thing. As I recall, on the original application, the approval set the condition that there was to be parking for 3 cars and the cars should be able to turn so they didn't have to reverse down that dirt track. If this shed is built and then will that condition still be okay?
So that element, as your concern raised, has been addressed on page 251, where the officer has considered the ability to park the cars and turn, and yes, they're content that there is space and that condition would remain and would be, achieved.
Any more questions? Debate? Councillor House-Surround?
It seems fairly straightforward, so I can move approval if nobody has anything to say.
We have a move for approval. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Freeman? Okay then, we'll move to the vote then. Those in favour, please show. Eleven. Right, so that concludes the. Oh, hang on, we've got.
So yeah, I can just confirm the application's been approved.
Okay. Agenda item 7, request to discharge section 52 agreement.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. This application it seeks to discharge the Section 52 agreement, which is basically the forerunner of what you're probably all familiar with, the Section 106, which didn't come into basically 106 is to replace the Section 52. So this is prior to 1990. It's related to an application for planning permission for a granny annex, which restricted the occupancy to ancillary residential accommodation in connection with Parkgate Farmhouse and Park Cottage, Bramley Corner. The submission is accompanied by detailed evidence from the applicant to demonstrate that the property has been occupied as a separate unit of accommodation since 1996, and therefore officers consider that the legal agreement no longer serves a useful purpose, and therefore the recommendation to remove it is supported by officers.
Thank you. Do we have any questions on that? Or any debate? Do I have a mover? Oh, Councillor Miller.
You have a mover to approve the officer's recommendation.
Thank you very much. And a seconder, Councillor House-Surround. I have a proposal on the table. All those in favour, please show. That's everybody. Okay, that's carried. Any objections or abstentions? None. Right. Decision?
Yeah, sorry, just to confirm that the Section 52 is therefore removed.
Right. Next item, review of validation requirements for planning applications.
Thank you, Chair. This report is simply to seek Development Control Committee's approval to implement review of the one-app requirements, that is the validation requirements for planning applications. Effectively, each authority has to do it every 2 years. That 2-year period is coming up to renewal. The report sets out there's been no specific legislative or policy changes that requires an update at this stage, but does acknowledge the fact that in later this year. We are anticipating a change with the implementation of the Environment Act, so we may bring back another report in due course. So in effect, the recommendation is, as set out on page 271, that at this stage no further changes be made for this time.
Any questions? Councillor Howell-Sorrell.
Yes, can this be devolved? Because bringing it back with no recommendations to this committee seems a waste of time. Is there any option for the leadership team to devolve that as a power to you to approve it on our behalf? Or is it a legal requirement that we have to hear it?
Yeah, I think the key thing is we don't have a delegated power to do so. I guess the other part of it is in some ways I think there's it's generally seen as good practice to bring it to the DC committee for that purpose. But in future there may be some more significant changes, because I think the past 3 times this paper's been over the last 6 years we've not proposed any changes.
Thank you. There being no more questions, and I assume you don't want to debate it. Do I have a mover? Yeah, Councillor Robinson, and a seconder, Councillor Miller. Those in favour, please show. I think that's carried unanimously. Okay, so that's, do we need to announce that as a decision, or is that just recorded? Just recorded, okay. So that brings us on to last business, quarterly planning appeals report.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a quarterly planning appeals report. The main planning appeals received in the period February to April are all recorded in Appendix A and B. In Appendix A in particular, draw members' attention to the appeal decision for the Minchin's Lane Bramley Solar Farm decision, which was allowed, but as members may be aware is now subject to a legal challenge by the residents group. Equally, there's a significant residential development decision for Stocks Farm on page 281. That appeal was lost and had implications for the council's housing supply, as we have previously discussed. The other part of this report that I bring to members' attention is the appeal performance on paragraph 1.5, where in the just over the year period we lost 17 out of a total of 56 appeals, so we were still under the corporate indicator requirement. That said, I would equally draw members' attentions to the risks set out in the paper, particularly at paragraph 7 on page 279, which picks up the points that we've discussed previously regarding the implications of failing government targets in terms of appeal performance.
Do we have any questions on that? I don't think we do. Okay, and does nobody wants to debate it? Do they? Do we have a mover? Councillor Robinson, a seconder. Councillor Howell-Sorrell. All those in favour, please show. I think that's unanimous. Just for noting that decision. And I think that concludes our business for this evening. So thank you very much, everybody, and have a safe journey home.